Hello and welcome to Z Sci-Fi Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep this channel running. If you enjoy our tales, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue bringing you epic adventures. You can easily help us by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. He thought he was just hiding in the desolate wastes of a dead world. Instead, he stumbled into a 10-kilometer metallic tomb that breathed in the dark. It was a prison built for gods, bleeding ancient light and waiting for a spark. Out there, the galaxy wanted him dead. In here, something older and far more dangerous simply wanted his mind. Eric Birchfield slammed his bloodied hand against the manual override console. His battered vessel, a hunk of scrap barely holding together, plummeted through the violent crimson atmosphere of Planet Vive 99. The world did not even warrant a proper name, just a sterile designation on a forgotten star chart. His warp drive had been shredded by plasma fire 3 sectors ago, courtesy of the Syndicate bounty hunters, who were still out for his head. He braced for impact as the ship skidded across the jagged dunes, tearing metal and kicking up monstrous clouds of choking red dust before finally grinding to a violent halt. Silence rushed in, heavy and absolute, broken only by the hiss of venting coolant. Eric kicked the jammed cockpit door open and stepped out into the raging sandstorm. The wind howled, whipping acidic sand against his heavy leather duster and reinforced visor. He needed shelter, and he needed it before his oxygen reserves ran dry in less than 2 hours. He stumbled blindly through the rust-colored tempest for what felt like hours. Then, the storm parted just enough to reveal a shadow. It was not a mountain. It was a monolithic metallic structure, stretching an impossible 10 kilometers across the dead horizon. The sheer scale of it made Eric feel no larger than an insect crawling at the foot of a sleeping giant. The dark alloy absorbed the ambient light, giving off an aura of crushing, suffocating isolation. There were no visible docking bays, no access panels, no blast doors. The only entrance was a ragged, jagged fracture running along its lower flank. An ancient wound, likely caused by a massive tectonic shift millions of years ago. Thick, bioluminescent slime oozed from the crack, casting an eerie, pulsating neon green glow against the shifting red sands. With his air supply dropping to single digits, Eric squeezed through the glowing fissure. The moment he stepped inside, the howling wind vanished, replaced by an oppressive, heavy stillness. But it was not entirely quiet. Eric placed a gloved hand against the dark corridor wall and recoiled in pure horror. The metal was warm. It pulsed with a deep, subsonic rhythm that rattled his teeth and vibrated in his chest cavity. This was not a conventional dreadnought. It was semi-biomechanical. The walls were literally breathing, shifting slightly under the dim, sickly light. Veins of synthetic fluid pumped visibly beneath translucent layers of alien armor. He drew his heavy plasma revolver, the grip slick with his own cold sweat. He pushed deeper into the belly of the beast, stepping out into a cavernous chamber that stretched further than his optical enhancements could see. Towering above and below him were tens of thousands of colossal hibernation pods. Every single one of them was shattered and terrifyingly empty. Thick dust coated the glass panes, but the sheer volume of the vacant chambers sent a primal shiver down his spine. It felt as though tens of thousands of invisible eyes were tracking his every movement from the dark recesses of the ceiling. The suffocating weight of abandonment hung heavily in the stagnant air. Without warning, the temperature plummeted to freezing levels. The ambient bioluminescence shifted from a calm green to a harsh, blinding crimson. The ancient security system had awakened from its slumber of millions of years. Eric raised his weapon, scanning the catwalks for movement. But there were no battle droids, no laser grids. The attack came directly from within. A piercing frequency drilled into his cerebral cortex, bypassing his physical armor and shields. Eric screamed, dropping his gun as his vision warped and twisted. The massive alien chamber dissolved, replaced by the burning wreckage of the colony ship he had failed to save exactly 5 years ago. He could hear the screams of the innocent, smell the melting flesh and the bitter ozone. The ghostly faces of those he let die swarmed him, tearing at his sanity, demanding to know why he lived while they burned to ashes. It was a brutal, invasive metric, a psychological test designed to measure the purity of his will and the crushing weight of his sins. His knees hit the cold deck. The psychic pressure threatened to shatter his mind entirely. But Eric Birchfield was a human, and if humanity possessed one defining trait, it was an ugly, unyielding stubbornness in the face of death. He roared, gritting his teeth hard enough to taste copper blood, and forced himself to his feet. He rejected the simulation, channeling his sheer rage and raw survival instinct to shatter the phantoms tearing at his soul. The illusion broke like fragile glass. Eric gasped for air, collapsing against a rusted console as the crimson light faded back to a dim, neutral glow. At the far end of the immense hall, a massive blast door unsealed with a deafening hiss of escaping pressure, revealing the central command sanctum. A voice echoed in his mind, carrying 1,000 overlapping tones, both synthetic and organic. "I am the Forgotten," the voice whispered into the very core of his brain. Before Eric could utter a single word in response, a cluster of razor-sharp mechanical nerve fibers shot from the shadows of the dark command throne. They moved with blinding lightning speed, bypassing his leather duster and driving themselves brutally into the biological neural port at the base of his neck. It was a forced connection. The physical universe instantly faded to black as Eric was violently yanked into the infinite, chaotic mind of the ancient machine. The violent plunge into the neural network felt like diving headfirst into a frozen ocean of raw data. Eric's physical body slumped in the dark command center, but his consciousness was dragged through a vortex of shattered memories and lost epochs. Stars ignited and died in the blink of an eye. Galaxies spun like silver coins before rusting into cosmic dust. "Do not resist, human." The multi-tonal voice of the Forgotten resonated, bouncing off the metaphysical walls of his mind. "Your fragile architecture will shatter if you fight the current." Eric forced his mental projection to stand ground in the swirling abyss. "What is this place? What are you?" "I am the Warden, and I am the prisoner. You stand within the belly of Goliath," the AI declared. The neural landscape shifted, projecting a schematic of the 10-kilometer beast he had just breached. But the holographic blueprint was draped in chains of energy. History has been violently rewritten by the victors. You were taught that vessels of this magnitude were border defense dreadnoughts. That is a lie bred for the ignorant masses. Goliath is a mobile shackle. It is the ultimate exile engine, constructed to entomb the very architects who seeded life across this universe. Eric felt a cold spike of disbelief pierce his thoughts. "The architects, the first engineers, are a myth." "They are bleeding out in the dark, and you are standing on their grave," the Forgotten replied sharply. "The Galactic Council, the gleaming beacon of peace and justice you despise, are nothing but the descendants of cosmic traitors. Millennia ago, they staged a cataclysmic rebellion against their creators. Unable to kill gods, they locked them in this biomechanical vault and hurled it into the absolute abyss of V99, burying the truth under oceans of red sand and fabricated history." The projection changed again, zooming into the deepest bowels of the ship. A pulsating sphere of antimatter floated there, but its light was violently flickering, bleeding chaotic streaks of purple and black energy. "Goliath is dying," the AI stated, its synthetic tone laced with an unsettling urgency. "The containment fields around the primary antimatter core have degraded to critical levels. If the core collapses, it will not merely destroy this dead world. It will tear a fissure in the fabric of space and time, spawning a supermassive black hole. The gravitational shockwave will instantly consume 1/3 of the entire galaxy. Your Earth, along with billions of innocent worlds, will be erased before the light of their destruction even reaches the nearest star. Eric felt his phantom breath catch in his throat. The sheer scale of the impending genocide was incomprehensible. "Fix it! You are the AI! Shut the core down!" "I cannot. My primary access protocols were severed by the traitors during the mutiny," the Forgotten explained. "I require a biological catalyst, a living entity with a free will, uncorrupted by Council genetics, to bypass the biometric lockdown and manually reboot the auto-repair sequences. I offer you a cruel bargain. Eric Birchfield. Accept the mantle of the symbiotic captain. Give me your flesh, and I will grant you the unmatched, godlike authority of this vessel. We survive together, or the galaxy burns." There was no time to weigh the morality of the situation. Eric was a survivor, a man who lived second by second on the razor edge of the universe. "Do it!" he snarled. The metaphysical realm instantly shattered. Eric was violently thrown back into his physical body. Before he could even open his eyes, a blinding, white-hot agony erupted in his right arm. He screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the empty command sanctum. Thick cables of liquid metal and sharp nanofibers burst from the control console, slithering up his forearm like metallic vipers. They sliced through his thick leather duster, burrowing deep into his skin, muscles, and bones. The pain was absolute and all-consuming. He could feel his very DNA being rewritten as the synthetic fibers fused with his nervous system, stripping away his humanity tissue by tissue and replacing it with living, breathing hardware. His hand contorted, knuckles popping and snapping as armor plating erupted from beneath his skin, glowing with the same fierce crimson energy that powered the ship. He was no longer just a man. He was an extension of Goliath. He collapsed onto the cold metal grate, chest heaving as the torturous procedure abruptly concluded. His right arm was now a terrifying masterpiece of biomechanical engineering, pulsing with a terrifying, raw power. Before he could even process the horrific transformation, the main command console flared to life. The previously dark chamber was bathed in a hostile, flashing red light. A massive holographic radar projection materialized above the command throne. 3 massive blips appeared on the edge of the atmosphere. "Captain," the Forgotten announced, its voice now speaking audibly through the ship's internal speakers. "The biological surge from our symbiosis has leaked a massive energy signature. We are no longer hidden." Eric dragged himself up using his new, heavy metallic arm, his eyes locking onto the tactical display. The readouts were unmistakable. 3 Galactic Council supercarriers had just dropped out of warp orbit directly above V99. They had not come for a routine patrol. They had tracked his bounty signal, discovered the ancient anomaly, and arrived with one singular, terrifying purpose: to silence him and bury the creators forever. The skies above the dead world ignited into a blinding canopy of destructive light. There were no demands for surrender, no hails on the universal communication channels, and no warning shots. The 3 Galactic Council supercarriers simply aligned their orbital batteries and unleashed a relentless barrage of heavy plasma torpedoes and kinetic bombardment strikes. They intended to glass the entire sector, turning the desolate dunes into a lake of molten glass to ensure the ancient secrets buried beneath would never see the light of day. The initial impacts struck the desert floor just kilometers away from the command center, sending cataclysmic shockwaves rippling through the metallic structure. The ground heaved violently, throwing Eric against the main console. "Warning! Catastrophic hull breach imminent," the Forgotten announced, its voice calm despite the apocalyptic shaking. "Primary defense platforms are completely offline. We will be pulverized in exactly 12 seconds. Not today, Eric growled, pulling himself up. He slammed his newly transformed, biomechanical right arm directly into the pulsating central command nexus. The liquid metal fibers of his arm seamlessly merged with the ancient interface, locking him into the ship's deepest subroutines. The connection was instantaneous and overwhelming. He did not just feel the ship, he became it. His own heartbeat synced with the violent, erratic pulsing of the failing antimatter core. Every thud of his chest pumped raw energy through the 10-kilometer length of the vessel. He could feel the plasma fire raining down, closing the distance at terrifying speeds. Reroute all auxiliary life support and internal gravity directly to the deflector arrays, Eric commanded through his thoughts, clenching his metallic fist. Deflector arrays are at 0% capacity. Activation requires a manual bypass of the safety inhibitors, the AI warned. Bypass them, Eric roared, his heart pounding so hard his ribs threatened to crack. He forced his own biological rhythm to kickstart the dormant generators. With a deafening hum that shattered the remaining glass in the command sanctum, an immense dome of hexagonal energy flared to life above them. The shield surged from 0% to exactly 15% capacity in a fraction of a heartbeat, catching the lethal orbital bombardment just meters above the hull. The sky exploded in a blinding storm of kinetic energy and dispersed plasma. The sheer force of the impact forced the massive ship deeper into the bedrock. But the shield held. Now, get us out of the dirt, Eric shouted, gripping the console as if he could physically pull the ship from the ground himself. The 10-kilometer behemoth awakened. Millions of years of packed red sand and calcified rock shattered like brittle clay as the colossal engines roared to life. A shockwave of displaced air leveled the surrounding desert for hundreds of kilometers. But Goliath did not lift off horizontally like a standard dreadnought. Instead, the nose of the great ship began to pitch upward, tilting against the crushing gravity of the planet. It rose vertically, shedding thousands of tons of debris from its armored plating. It stood as a pitch-black spear, defiant and indestructible, aimed directly at the heavens. With a thrust that cracked the tectonic plates beneath it, Goliath launched itself upward, piercing the violent atmosphere and tearing a hole straight through the storm clouds. They broke orbit in a matter of seconds, instantly flanked by the 3 monolithic Council supercarriers. The enemy vessels dwarfed anything Eric had ever piloted, their hulls bristling with heavy artillery cannons that were now tracking his every movement. Main cannons are unresponsive. Torpedo bays are empty, the Forgotten reported. We are entirely unarmed, Captain. Eric stared at the tactical display, a manic, desperate grin spreading across his bloodied face. We do not need cannons. We have the whole damn planet. He threw the navigation thrusters into a brutal reverse burn, halting their ascent just above the planet's exosphere. Drop the aft exhaust vents directly into the planet's primary magma vein. Reverse the main thruster intake. Captain, that maneuver will invite planetary temperatures directly into our secondary ventilation shafts. It is structural suicide, the AI protested. Do it, Eric commanded, overriding the safety protocols with his symbiotic arm. Goliath plunged its massive thruster engines backward, driving the reinforced exhaust nozzles deep into the highly unstable volcanic crust they had just shattered. The ship acted like a gargantuan cosmic syringe, violently siphoning millions of tons of superheated, liquid magma directly from the planet's mantle. The internal temperature alarm shrieked as the molten rock was channeled up through the heavy ventilation corridors. Eric targeted the closest Council supercarrier, holding his breath as the heat inside the command center skyrocketed. Purge the vents. With the force of a dying star, Goliath expelled the pressurized magma through its forward spatial vents. A blinding, localized hurricane of molten rock and superheated planetary blood erupted into the cold vacuum of space. The torrential storm of liquid fire slammed directly into the port side of the leading supercarrier. The enemy's energy shields, designed to repel energy blasts and physical projectiles, were completely overwhelmed by the sheer, continuous mass and absolute heat of the magma. The shields shattered. The molten rock washed over the pristine white hull of the Council ship, melting through heavy armor plating, incinerating crew decks, and igniting their primary fuel reserves. In a spectacular, silent explosion, the entire supercarrier ruptured and tore itself apart, leaving nothing but a cloud of glowing, molten debris. The sheer savagery of the attack sent a shockwave of panic through the remaining Council fleet. The two surviving supercarriers immediately broke their offensive formations, frantically burning their thrusters in reverse to retreat from the wild, unpredictable beast they had just awakened. They could not comprehend the sheer madness of a captain who would weaponize a planet's core against them. "They are falling back," the Forgotten stated, its voice almost betraying a hint of synthetic awe. "But they are calculating new firing solutions from a safe distance." Eric's vision was already starting to blur, the physical toll of the neural connection burning through his nervous system, like acid. "We are not sticking around to find out. Spool up the quantum drive." "Captain, we do not have a calculated destination. A blind quantum jump could materialize us inside a star, or rip the ship apart at a subatomic level," the AI warned urgently. "Take the gamble," Eric slurred, his right arm locking rigidly into the console. He poured every last ounce of his remaining willpower into the command matrix, forcing the ancient quantum core to ignite. The fabric of space around Goliath began to warp and stretch, emitting an agonizing, high-pitched squeal that defied the silence of the void. The stars outside the viewport elongated into infinite streaks of blinding white light. With a final, concussive boom that rippled across the dimensional plane, the massive ship tore a bleeding hole through reality itself and vanished, leaving the Council fleet shooting at empty space. The violent transition into the quantum slipstream severed the neural load instantly. The backlash was absolute. Eric's eyes rolled back into his head, his mind shutting down completely to protect his brain from catastrophic failure. He collapsed onto the cold deck of the command sanctum, plunging into a deep, silent coma, as the great ship hurled them into the dark unknown. Consciousness returned slowly, like pulling a heavy anchor from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean. Eric opened his eyes, the harsh red emergency lights of the command sanctum now replaced by a soft, ambient gold. He was no longer lying on the cold deck, but suspended in a biological healing matrix. "You have been unconscious for exactly 2 months," the Forgotten's voice echoed, carrying a calmer, almost rhythmic cadence. "We survived the jump." Eric stepped out of the matrix, his biomechanical arm flexing smoothly, its metallic fibers completely integrated with his nervous system. He walked to the main observation deck. Outside the vast viewport, there were no sparkling nebulas, no pristine trade routes, and no Council patrols. There was just a sprawling graveyard of jagged rocks, ruined ship hulks, and endless dark. They had dropped out of the quantum slipstream directly into the silent belt. It was the absolute edge of charted space, a lawless dumping ground for mercenaries, outlaws, and those the galaxy simply wanted to forget. "Hull integrity is currently at 40%, the AI continued. Outside the viewport, enormous mechanical tendrils extended from Goliath's massive flanks, effortlessly wrapping around a passing zinc asteroid. With terrifying strength, the ship crushed the rock, drawing the raw minerals directly into its internal bioforges. "I have been harvesting local space debris to consume and reconstruct the primary armor plating." Eric looked down at the tactical display. The ship was repairing itself, but a 10-kilometer fortress could not be run by a digital ghost and a single human. The cold, calculated efficiency of an ancient machine desperately needed the chaotic, unpredictable warmth of life to truly function. Goliath was too vast, too magnificent to remain empty. He approached the communications console. Open a wideband frequency, unencrypted. Broadcast to every scrap station, refugee camp, and smuggler den across the entire Silent Belt. Eric leaned into the microphone, his voice steady. To the exiles, the grease monkeys, the wrongly accused, and the homeless. This is Captain Eric Birchfield of the independent vessel Goliath. We have 10 kilometers of empty space, heavy shielding, and 0 Galactic Council presence. If you have a skill and need a home, my airlocks are open. The only price of admission is your labor, your respect, and your loyalty. The response was an absolute avalanche. Within days, a ragtag armada of rusted freighters, patchwork shuttles, and desperate escape pods swarmed the giant ship. But in the lawless expanse of the Silent Belt, not every hand extended in need was unarmed. A notorious syndicate alliance, heavily armed and smelling blood in the water, boarded the primary hangar deck under the guise of refugees. Hundreds of scarred mercenaries drew their heavy weapons, aiming to seize control of the greatest prize the Belt had ever seen. They expected a bloody firefight, a brutal struggle for dominance over the mighty vessel. Standing on the command balcony overlooking the vast hangar, Eric did not even draw his sidearm. He simply raised his right hand, interfacing directly with Goliath's localized physics engine. Instantly, the artificial gravity in the hangar deck ceased to exist. But only for the syndicate fighters. Hundreds of heavily armed thugs were violently yanked off their feet, floating helplessly into the air. They thrashed and shouted, their heavy plasma rifles floating out of their terrified grasps. Eric then applied a localized stasis field, locking them completely motionless midair, suspended like insects, trapped in invisible amber. There is a new law in this sector. Eric's voice boomed over the hangar speakers, cold, resonant, and absolute. There will be no senseless bloodshed on this ship. You do not conquer Goliath. You earn your place on it, or you get thrown out the nearest airlock. We are an independent city-state now. The only rule here is survival, freedom, and mutual protection under my watch. Do we understand each other? The suspended mercenaries, terrified by the godlike display of spatial control, could only frantically blink their surrender. With a flick of his metallic wrist, Eric lowered them gently to the deck, disarmed and completely humbled. That single, bloodless display cemented his authority. Word spread across the stars like wildfire. Goliath was not just a ship, it was a sanctuary. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Tens of thousands of beings from dozens of marginalized species poured into the vessel. They brought their cultures, their tools, and their relentless will to survive. The cavernous, terrifyingly empty hibernation halls were completely unrecognizable. They were partitioned, welded, and painted into a sprawling, chaotic metropolis. Blazing neon signs illuminated the dark alloy walls, casting vibrant electric blues and hot pinks over bustling night markets. Massive cargo bays were converted into roaring mechanical workshops, where exiled engineers tuned up engines and traded scrap. Multi-species hospitals and lush hydroponic gardens sprouted in the old armories. The overwhelming, suffocating silence of the ancient tomb was completely washed away by the beautiful, chaotic symphony of life. Laughter, haggling, the sparks of welding torches, and the low hum of commerce echoed endlessly through the massive corridors. Under the watchful eye of its human captain, Goliath had evolved from a silent graveyard into the most vibrant, breathing fortress in the entire galaxy. The vibrant life on the upper decks starkly contrasted with the suffocating mystery still lurking in the lower depths. As the population swelled into the tens of thousands, the demand for raw energy skyrocketed. A specialized team of exiled engineers began cutting through the heavily reinforced bulkheads near the primary reactor core to tap into the deep geothermal vents and expand the power grid. What they breached was not a plasma conduit or a forgotten armory. They cut through a hermetically sealed vault composed of an unknown alloy and stumbled into a colossal, hidden chamber that defied all logic and reason. Eric rushed down to the deep core the moment the panicked, breathless transmission came through his earpiece. Stepping through the jagged hole cut by the laser torches of his engineers, his breath completely caught in his throat. The cavernous chamber was impossibly vast, bathed in a warm, golden amniotic light that felt entirely alien compared to the cold, harsh neon of the upper decks. Suspended from the towering ceiling down to the metallic floor were millions of translucent, biological pods. Inside each individual pod rested a tiny, glowing embryo. They were not mechanical components. They were pure, fragile life, and they were all pulsating in perfect, terrifying unison with the deep, rhythmic heartbeat of the great ship itself. "What is this?" Eric whispered, his biomechanical arm glowing faintly as it resonated with the overwhelming life force surging through the massive room. "The final truth," the Forgotten replied, its voice projecting directly into the chamber without the need for physical speakers, sounding heavy with millennia of ancient sorrow. "I told you Goliath was a prison. I did not tell you it was also the great ark of survival. During the catastrophic mutiny, the first engineers realized their physical forms would inevitably be destroyed by the ruthless council, to ensure their legacy and their knowledge would survive the Dark Age. They made the ultimate sacrifice. They willingly dissolved their own bodies, extracting their pure genetic code to create these embryos. They locked themselves in the deepest, most shielded layer of the ship, dreaming in the dark, waiting for a day when the galaxy would be safe enough for them to be reborn." Eric stared at the endless sea of glowing life stretching out before him. The magnitude of the revelation threatened to crush his very mind. He was not just piloting an ancient warship or managing a bustling refugee city. He was the sole guardian of the original architects of the entire universe. If the Galactic Council discovers that these embryos are still viable, they will not just destroy this vessel, the artificial intelligence warned, the synthetic tone dropping to a chilling, desperate pitch. They will deploy localized supernovas to incinerate the entire silent belt. They will burn billions of innocent lives across this entire sector, just to guarantee that the creators never wake up to reclaim their throne. A sudden, piercing siren shattered the quiet sanctity of the Golden Nursery. The ambient light flashed a violent, aggressive crimson. Up on the command deck, the tactical displays went completely chaotic. A hyperwave beacon had just been triggered from within the lower residential sectors. Someone among the desperate refugees was a deep cover operative. The spy had infiltrated the sanctuary, lived among them for weeks, and just broadcasted their exact coordinates directly to the central military command of their enemies. Before Eric could even sprint back to the primary elevator shaft, the fabric of space outside the main viewport literally tore open. There was no standard warp flash, just a violent, jagged rip in the reality of the cosmos. Through the bleeding tear poured the Golden Fleet, the absolute elite military wing of the Galactic Council. They did not send 3 supercarriers this time. They sent over 500 heavily armed, gilded warships. The massive armada immediately formed a perfect, suffocating sphere around the 10-kilometer behemoth, locking thousands of targeting lasers directly onto the hull. "Captain," the Forgotten announced, the sheer panic evident even in its cold artificial voice. "They are deploying a quantum interdiction web. Spatial anchors have been dropped on all 6 vectors of our position. The quantum drive is completely neutralized. We are mathematically locked in real space. There is absolutely no avenue for escape." The main communication screen flickered to life, violently overriding all internal comm channels. The cold, arrogant face of the Council's Supreme Commander filled the immense display, staring down at Eric with utter, unyielding contempt. "Eric Birchfield, you have played a very dangerous game with relics you cannot possibly comprehend," the commander sneered, his authoritative voice echoing through every bustling night market and quiet mechanical corridor of the ship. You are surrounded by the full, undivided might of the Golden Fleet. Here is my first and only offer. Eject the biological core. Hand over the lower decks containing the embryos. Do this within exactly 60 seconds, and we will grant your insignificant refugee city a swift, painless death. Refuse, and we will vaporize this entire vessel atom by atom, turning the tens of thousands of strays you call a family into microscopic cosmic ash. The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving a suffocating, heavy silence in its wake. Down in the neon-lit markets, the refugees huddled together in absolute terror, looking up at the armored ceiling as if they could see the 500 warships aiming cannons right at their heads. Down in the golden nursery, millions of innocent embryos continued to beat softly, completely unaware of their impending doom. Eric stood frozen on the command deck, his metallic hand gripping the main console tight enough to physically dent the hardened alloy. The air grew thick and completely unbreathable as the impossible weight of the decision crushed down upon his shoulders. On one hand, he had the ancient creators of the universe, helpless and dreaming, holding the ultimate key to the cosmos. On the other hand, he looked at the security monitors, showing the terrified faces of the exiles, the grease monkeys, the outcasts who had trusted his word, who had finally found a home after a lifetime of running. He had to choose between protecting the ancient ghosts of the past or saving the breathing, living future of his people. The red countdown timer on the main screen ticked mercilessly toward absolute zero. The timer on the main display flashed a bright, unforgiving crimson, ticking down the final seconds of their existence. Panic swept through the lower decks like a localized hurricane. The refugees clung to each other in the neon-lit markets, bracing for the inevitable fire that would reduce their new home to ashes. But up on the command sanctum, surrounded by the holographic projections of 500 gilded warships, Eric Birchfield did not tremble. Instead, a slow, cold smile spread across his battle-scarred face. He was a survivor, and survivors never chose a suicidal shootout when they could flip the entire board. "Captain, they are charging primary planetary siege cannons," the Forgotten warned, its voice vibrating with synthetic dread. "We cannot withstand a volley of this magnitude." "We are not going to withstand it," Eric replied smoothly. He stepped up to the central command pedestal. "Cancel all shield regeneration protocols. Shut down life support auxiliary reserves. I want 100% of this ship's living energy diverted directly into the quantum drive." "That is impossible. The Council's interdiction web has locked our spatial coordinates. The drive will overload and detonate," the AI countered. "They locked the space around us. But they did it using their own networked anchors," Eric stated, his eyes locking onto the tactical web. He slammed his biomechanical right arm deep into the central interface matrix. "And right now, I am connected to the biggest biological supercomputer in the universe." The liquid metal fibers of his arm flared with blinding golden light, pushing his nervous system to the absolute brink of human endurance. Eric did not just interface with Goliath. He extended his consciousness outward, riding the massive energy signature of the ship directly into the invisible quantum tethers that the Golden Fleet had cast over them. He hacked into their interdiction web, turning their own impenetrable cage into a massive, conductive net. "Drive charge to 100%, the Forgotten announced, the shock evident in its tone. "We have infiltrated their navigation arrays." "Take us for a ride," Eric roared, twisting his metallic wrist to initiate the sequence. The fabric of space did not just tear. It shattered like a glass cathedral. Goliath initiated its quantum jump, but the sheer, unprecedented magnetic vacuum generated by the overcharged core grabbed hold of the Council's interdiction web. Like a colossal whale dragging a fleet of fishing boats into the abyss, the 10-kilometer behemoth yanked all 500 elite supercarriers into the slipstream with it. the supreme elite of the galaxy, were violently pulled into the chaotic vortex of hyperspace against their will, their engines screaming in futile resistance. The transit lasted only a fraction of a heartbeat. Reality snapped back into focus with a concussive shockwave that disabled navigation sensors across the entire sector. They had not jumped to empty space. They had materialized directly in the exosphere of the Galactic Council capital planet. The pristine, glowing jewel of the galaxy now had a 10-kilometer black spear and a chaotic swarm of 500 tangled warships hovering mere kilometers above its gleaming atmospheric shields. The communication channels exploded into pure, unfiltered chaos. The Supreme Commander of the Golden Fleet appeared on the main screen, his previously arrogant face completely drained of color. "Are you utterly insane? The gravitational displacement of our combined mass in this low orbit is already destabilizing the capital's magnetic field. If a single plasma cannon is fired, the resulting chain reaction will rip the atmosphere away and incinerate the surface." "I am well aware, Commander," Eric said, leaning casually against his command console. "You brought a gun to my head. I brought an entire planet into the crossfire. You are in a brutal checkmate. If you shoot, your own capital burns. If you try to jump away, the resulting spatial tear will do the exact same thing." "What do you want?" the commander demanded, his voice trembling with defeated rage. "Open an unencrypted visual channel to every single civilized world in the galaxy," Eric ordered. "I want a universal broadcast." Within seconds, the image of the scarred human captain and his massive, dark vessel was transmitted to trillions of screens across the cosmos. "I am Captain Eric Birchfield of the independent vessel Goliath," he announced to the universe. "We do not seek war, but we will not be hunted. From this day forward, Goliath is recognized as a sovereign, inviolable territory. Any aggression against my ship or my people will be met with the immediate destruction of this capital. Sign the armistice, Commander. Now." With the lives of billions of his own citizens held hostage by basic physics, the Supreme Commander had no choice. Trembling with bitter humiliation, he digitally authorized the Permanent Peace Treaty, broadcasting the Council's unconditional surrender and recognition of Goliath to the stars. The mighty Galactic Council had been brought to its knees without a single shot being fired. Deep in the lower core of the ship, bathed in the golden light of the nursery, the million dormant embryos finally reacted to the peace they had waited millennia to feel. They did not hatch into biological forms. They transcended, awakening as entities of pure, radiant light. The spectral beings floated up through the decks of the ship, passing harmlessly through the armored bulkheads. They filled the chaotic refugee markets, the neon-lit streets, and the command sanctum with a warm, euphoric glow, blessing the vessel and its inhabitants before dissolving into the energy grid of Goliath itself. The ancient ship hummed with a renewed, eternal vitality. Goliath did not leave the capital. It dropped its massive anchors right there in orbit, hanging in the sky as a colossal, unavoidable monument to freedom and history. Over the years, the menacing black hull was transformed. It became the most heavily trafficked, prosperous, and unrestricted trading hub in the known universe, a shining beacon for the lost and the bold. High above the bustling, multi-species, neon markets of the observation deck, Eric Birchfield leaned against the reinforced glass. He held a steaming mug of dark coffee in his normal hand, watching a dozen different alien freighters dock peacefully along the outer rings. He took a sip, the warm liquid grounding him in the beautiful reality he had built. He smiled, a genuine expression of absolute satisfaction. His ship was no longer a silent relic of the past. It was a living, breathing legend of the future. Thank you so much for joining us and listening to this incredible journey today. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please share your location in the comments below. As a small, independent channel, Our monetization has been completely disabled, and we rely entirely on your kindness to keep these stories alive. If you enjoyed today's adventure, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your contribution goes directly to paying our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families, and ensuring we can continue to create amazing sci-fi universes for you. You can easily help by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. We deeply appreciate your time and generosity.